In today's session, we will continue our discussion about psychological testing. The main objectives in this lesson are to understand psychological testing, types of psychological test, speed tests, performance test, dexterity test and power test. A psychological test is a measuring tool or instrument designed to measure psychological attributes and variables. Psychological testing is a big business today that has surpassed the ways of personal judgment, guesswork and intuition to arrive at a conclusion based on facts, objectivity and free of personal biases. In this module, we will discuss further about psychological tests using different criteria. An overabundance of standardized and published psychological tests in the market show that psychological tests can be classified in many ways. According to the mode of administration, psychological tests are of two types: individual tests, group tests. Speed and power tests are the two types of psychological tests that differ according to the rate of performance. On the basis of behavioral dimension measured, psychological tests are classified into personality, intelligence, aptitude, achievement and creativity tests. Personality tests measure a person's individuality in terms of his unique or specific traits. Intelligence tests measure global mental capacities of an individual. Aptitude tests gauge an individual's capability of learning a specific task. Achievement tests evaluates a person's past learning. Creativity tests measure a person's ability to think novel or new and unique ideas. Verbal, non-verbal, norm-referenced, criterion-referenced, culture-specific and culture-free tests are various other types of psychological tests. Apart from this, psychometricians are now shifting their attention to the new domains of psychological testing. This includes positive testing and use of technology in testing. Positive testing aims to enrich human lives by focusing on topics like the quality of life, hope, happiness, compassion. Also, the current trend is dominated by the use of technology in testing, and the World Wide Web has opened the scope of virtual testing. We can comfortably say from our previous lessons that psychological testing is important to us in multiple ways. The advent of the World Wide Web has only made the accumulation of data easily available to the researcher. It has made testing affordable and stress-free by reducing the stigma attached to it. Psychological testing. Let us revisit the topic of psychological testing to understand the wide variety of tests that are available and how to further classify them. Psychological testing is a big business today. It has emerged as an important tool of objective psychometric assessment of psychological and social attributes. The science of psychological testing has always responded to the needs of a changing society in which man is changing faster and his mind is increasingly becoming erratic and unpredictable. However, in all such scenarios and the precipitating global economic crisis, the need to tap human potential is at an all-time high, though social tolerance is at an all-time low. Psychometricians have responded well to all these challenges, and now there are specialized tests for every conceivable psychometric attribute to the acceptable levels of reliability and validity. The development and application of psychological tests is considered one of the major achievements of psychologists in the last century. Defining formally, a psychological test is an objective procedure for sampling and quantifying human behavior to make an inference about a particular psychological construct using standardized stimuli and methods of administration and scoring. Psychological tests are used across the globe for various purposes like counseling, selection, diagnosis, placement, etc. Used in a variety of settings, the results of psychological tests are used to explain and predict the behavior. Though psychological tests enormously vary in their layouts and applications, most tests have some characteristic feature. Using different criteria, psychological tests can be classified in the following manner. Let us look at the classification of psychological tests. According to the mode of administration, they are classified into two types: individual and group tests. According to the rate of performance, they are classified into two types: speed and power test. According to the behavioral dimension measure, they can be classified into personality tests and aptitude tests. Intelligence, achievement, creativity, interest inventories, value test and attitude test fall under this category. According to the medium used, they can be classified into paper pencil test, performance or situational test. According to the nature of the test items, they can be classified into verbal and non-verbal. Non-verbal can be further divided into objective and essay type test. According to the mode of interpretation, we can classify the tests as norm referenced or criterion referenced. According to the mode of scoring, we can classify the tests to be self-scored, expert scored or hand scored or machine scored. According to the scope or the applicability, they can be divided into culture specific test or culture free test. Classification according to the mode of administration. According to the mode of administration, tests can be classified as individual tests and group tests. Individual tests. These tests are administered to one person at a time and are useful for collecting comprehensive information about the testee. They are often used in clinical evaluations. The problems with individual tests are that they are costly, time consuming and labor intensive. An example of individual tests in the children's is the children's individual test for creativity. Group tests. Group tests are primarily designed for mass testing. That is, they can be administered to more than one individual at a time. They are economical and time saving. For example, Army Alpha and Army Beta tests. Classification according to the rate of performance. According to the rate of performance, psychological tests are classified as speed test and power test. Speed tests are timed tests. That is, they examine the subject's speed of responding within the stipulated period of time. These test items in a speed test are of uniform difficulty, but time limit is such that no examinee can attempt all the items. A pure speed test is a test composed of easy items so that the subject responding never gives a wrong answer and his score is equal to the number of questions attempted by him. Example of a speed test is the clinical speed and accuracy test. Power test. Power tests, on the other hand, offer enough time for the subject to attempt all the questions. In a power test, the items are arranged according to their increasing order of difficulty, and certain items are such that they are too difficult for anyone to solve. Thus, in power tests, they are designed to gauge the knowledge of the test taker. A score on the power test depends entirely upon the number of items answered and answered correctly. Raven's progressive matrices is an example of power test. According to the behavioral attribute measured, according to the behavioral attributes assessed, tests can be classified into personality ability, intelligence, aptitude, achievement and creativity tests, and also tests of attitudes, values and interests. Personality tests. These tests are designed to measure a person's individuality in terms of his unique traits and behavior. These tests help in predicting an individual's future behavior. They come in several varieties like checklists, inventories and subject evaluation techniques, ink blot and sentence completion tests. Personality tests can broadly be classified further into two categories: structured tests and unstructured personality tests. Let us now discuss in depth about the following tests: performance, power, speed and dexterity test. Speed and dexterity test. Speed tests are designed to assess how quickly a test taker is able to complete the items within a set time period. The primary objective of speed tests is to measure the person's ability to process information quickly and accurately while under duress. Speed tests contain more items the vast majority of applicants will be able to answer in the time allotted, and the items are usually not high in difficulty. Scoring is based on how many questions are answered by the applicant within the time limit. Often these tests are used by human resource professionals and IO psychologists during the hiring processes. On the other hand, dexterity refers to the ability of a person to use the fingers, hands and arms to perform a task. The quality of performance in daily living skills, work-related functioning and recreational activities is determined to a large degree by hand function and manual dexterity. The hand has to be able to undertake extremely fine and sensitive movements and must also be able to perform tasks requiring considerable force. An interplay of sensory and motor components in the hand and fingers allows for independent control of fingers in terms of timing, kinematics and force. Dexterity tests measure the accuracy of hand and finger movements under controlled conditions. They help physical therapists to develop rehabilitation plans for patients and to measure the effectiveness of their programs. They can help identify and evaluate certain forms of brain damage, identify neurologically based learning disabilities and musculoskeletal disabilities. Dexterity tests measure the accuracy of hand and finger movements under controlled conditions. There are several ways to assess dexterity and coordination. The O'Connor finger dexterity test evaluates fine motor skills by requiring the extensive use of fingertips to place pins into a pegboard. It is timed, so speed and accuracy are considered in the test scoring. Two extremely important factors must be considered for a speed test. They are the time to be provided for testing and the degree of speedness we wish to build into our test and the speed of performance. Keeping in mind the coordination required to perform the task relatively quickly. Now, let us consider the O'Connor tweezer dexterity test to further understand the speed and dexterity test used in a counseling setting. Finger dexterity test. Dexterity or the speed of coordinated movement has long been considered as an important aspect of hand function. Davis presented the ability to deploy the fingers with dexterity as a component of hand function and listed precision and fine coordination as elements for its evaluation. Professionals generally agree that there are different types of dexterity. As early as 1949, Super differentiated between gross and fine dexterity, stating that tests for arm and hand coordination require gross movement, whereas fine assembly work involving the wrist and fingers requires fine dexterity. For doing an activity, it requires tremendous hand dexterity and invaluable hand-eye coordination, precision of finger movements, and concurrently the speed with which a task is carried out is also significant. O'Connor finger dexterity test acts as an invaluable screening test which in advance determines all the above parameters. The O'Connor dexterity test FDT is aimed to test of both manual and fine dexterity. The material it generally uses is the O'Connor finger dexterity board with 300 pins. The O'Connor finger dexterity test requires hand placement of 3 pins per hole, consisting of 100 holes of about 3 by 16 inch in diameter holes. They are arranged in 10 rows and spaced half an inch apart. The procedure to conduct this test is, the subject is asked to pick up 3 pins simultaneously from the pile of pins with the fingers of one hand and placed into each of the 100 holes, starting from the farthest corner, filling every row one after the other, in Z pattern, moving towards yourself. The time required in minutes to fill the 100 holes is the basis for the score. The fewer minutes required filling the 100 holes, the higher is the score. In turn, indicating that the efficiency of the subject is better. The instructions given to the subject are: here is a board with holes that have room for 3 pins in each hole. Pick up 3 pins from the tray at a time and fill up the holes by placing these 3 pins in each hole as fast as you can. Use only one hand and only your fingers. Start from the left top corner and work towards the right. Fill up the first row, then the second row, and then go down one by one to the bottom row. Instead, if you go filling up from up and down, your sleeves or fingers may catch the pins. Be sure to fill up each row completely before you start the next row. Do not skip over the holes or rows. If you miss or drop down 1 or 2 pins, do not stop to pick up them. There are extra pins. Now, the experimenter can give the order ready or go. At once, the experimenter should also start the stop clock to run and make a note of the first 5 rows and then for the second 5 rows. When the subject has completed all the 10 rows, the experimenter should remove all the pins and put them in the tray as they were before and make ready for the second trial. In the same manner, 3 trials should be performed and the time should be noted down. The time in seconds is the score. This should be given in a tabular column. Now let's understand the results. The results is the time taken by the subject to fill up the first 5 rows and the second 5 rows, and this should be given the total time taken for each trial to be worked out. In the same manner, for all the 4 trials, the time should be worked out. Thus, the mean time for first half and for the second half of the trials can be used to identify the speed with which they can perform the task. As these tasks do not grow in the level of difficulty, it is used in prediction of various professions such as artists, surgeons, players, etc. The tests allow us to know the level of proficiency they can achieve in their respective field. Now, let us discuss about power tests and performance test. Power test, a type of test intended to calculate the participant's level of mastery of a particular topic under conditions of little or no time pressure. The test is designed so that items become progressively more difficult. As the name suggests, a power test is taken to measure the power or strength of its candidates, that is, the test taker's profundity of knowledge in the area being tested. According to Taiwo, 1995, a power test refers to any test in which time is no constraint or whose time limit is so generous that most examinees are able to attend all the items of the test. The methods you need to use to answer questions in a power test are not obvious, and working out how to answer the questions is the difficult part. Once you have determined this, arriving at the correct answer is usually relatively straightforward. Features of a power test. A power test contains items that vary in difficulty to the point that no subject is expected to get all the items right, even with unlimited time. In other words, the items in power tests are arranged in order of difficulty. The first item is very easy, the second is difficult than the first one, the third is more difficult than the first two, and so on. A power test consists of graded items, each item presumed to be more difficult than its preceding one. That is, item difficulty generally increases and it increases gradually. A well constructed power test precludes a testee from getting correct an item beyond which he gets stuck, and his score on the test is taken as an index of his power or strength of work. In power tests, a definite but ample time is given for all or at least most of the candidates to attempt every item. This makes power test a sort of graded scale, and the higher up the scale a candidate can move, the greater is his insight of knowledge in the area of being tested. Power tests tend to be more relevant to such purposes as the evaluation of academic achievement, for which the highest level of difficulty at which a person can succeed is of greater interest than his speed on easy tasks. Power tests are used more at the graduate, professional or managerial level. A power test, on the other hand, will present relatively a small number of complex questions. Power aptitude tests, meanwhile, involve questions that require more time for thinking and comprehension. Performance test. A performance test is an assessment that requires an examinee to actually perform a task or activity, rather than simply answering questions referring to specific parts. The purpose is to ensure greater reliability of what is being tested. They are particularly used in the assessment of non-verbal aspects of behavior such as motor performance. They can also be used in assessing the cognitive abilities of an individual. Performance tests are commonly used in workplace and professional applications such as professional certification and licensure. When used for personal selection, the tests might be referred to as a work sample. A licensure example would be cosmetologists being required to demonstrate a haircut or a manicure on a live person. For instance, the assessment to become certified as an ophthalmic technician includes two components: a multiple choice examination and a computerized skill simulation. The examinee must demonstrate the ability to complete 7 tasks commonly performed on the job, such as retinoscopy, that are simulated on a computer. For example, aptitude and ability tests are considered as maximum performance tests because they test what you can achieve when you are making maximum effort. There are two different styles of maximum performance tests: speed tests and power tests. The ability tests are assessment instruments designed to measure the capacity of individuals to perform particular physical or mental tasks. Ability tests were developed in the individual differences tradition of psychology and evolved from early tests of general intelligence. They are standardized methods of assessing an individual's performance in different work-related tasks or situations. They measure potential rather than just academic performance and are frequently used by employers as indicators of how people will perform in work setting. On the other hand, an aptitude test is designed to assess what a person is capable of doing or to predict what a person is able to learn or do given the right education and instruction. It represents a person's level of competency to perform a certain type of task. These aptitude tests are often used to assess academic potential or career suitability and may be used to assess either mental or physical talent in a variety of domains. Examples of aptitude tests. People encounter a variety of aptitude tests throughout their personal and professional lives, often starting when they are children going to school. Here are a few examples of common aptitude tests: a test assessing an individual's aptitude to become a fighter pilot, a career test evaluating a person's capability to work as an air traffic controller. An aptitude test is given to high school students to determine which type of career they might be good at, a computer programming test to determine how a job candidate might solve different hypothetical problems, a test designed to test a person's physical abilities needed for a particular job such as police officer or firefighter. Aptitude tests in school. Students encounter a variety of aptitude tests throughout school as they think about what they might like to study in college or do for as a career. High school students often take several aptitude tests that are designed to help them determine what they might want to study in college or pursue as a career. These tests can sometimes give a general idea of what might interest students as a future career. For example, a student might take an aptitude test suggesting that they are good with numbers and data. Such results might imply that a career as an accountant, banker, or stockbroker would be a good choice for that particular student. As the power of our mental ability makes a real difference to our potential at work, be it in professional or school setting. The multiple tests used by psychologists, especially the speed, power, performance and dexterity tests, all help us in understanding the individual's strengths and potential, and also help us in deciding what job or educational field we might choose. Now let us revisit what we have done in this lesson. Psychological tests can be classified on various dimensions. One classification, which is based on the rate of performance, distinguishes between speed test and power test. Speed tests are the ones in which individual differences depend entirely on the speed of performance. A power test contains items that vary in difficulty to the point that no subject is expected to get all items right even with unlimited time. However, speed tests do give an accurate indication of performance in power tests, though this is not always the case. In other words, if you do well in speed tests, then you will also do well in power tests. It has emerged as an important tool of objective psychometric assessment of psychological and social attributes. A psychological test is an objective procedure for sampling and quantifying human behavior to make an inference about a particular psychological construct using standardized stimuli and methods of administration and scoring, and also in predicting human behavior.